good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where are you around the world. You are very welcome to join this session hosted by the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. I'm Juan David Gutierrez. I'm a GPAI expert from the Responsible AI Working Group, and I'm joined by Alison Gilwald, who is also an expert from GPAI and from the Working Group on data justice, data governance, and as you can see, we're also joining with colleagues from all over the world, which I will present in brief. I'm just waiting for everyone to join. We now have in total 27 participants, so that's very good. I would like to first remind you about GPAI, about the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, which is an integrated partnership now that brings together both OECD state members and GPAI countries to advance an ambitious agenda for implementing human-centric, safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence embodied in the principles of the OECD's recommendation on AI. And today, this webinar is part of a project that it's called Algorithmic Transparency in the Public Sector, which Alison and I co-lead. And in brief, I'm going to give the word to Alison so that she will present this project. But in the meantime, let me let you know that today we have a very rich agenda. Because we'll start with a presentation from Alison about what's GPAI, about the Algorithmic Transparency Project that we co-lead. And also, we're going to present the first report produced as part of this project. That it's a report about algorithmic transparency instruments that are being used in the public sector around the world. And additionally, and perhaps most importantly, we'll have colleagues from different countries, from governments and civil society and academia, that will present and discuss specific case studies. Let me tell you who will be presenting today very fastly, although later on we'll have more thorough presentations. Today, we'll have Maria Paz Hermosilla, which is the director at GovLab in the University Adolfo Ibáñez in Chile. We have Robert Bos, who is a developer of AI validation tools at the Dutch Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations. We have David Cabo, who is co-director and CTO at CEIMIA, an NGO from Spain. And then I think we haven't been able to bring her on board, but she will probably arrive anytime soon. Marielle Kisment, that is a director of ETA Lab in France. Together we'll discuss today about algorithmic transparency, but more importantly, we're going to discuss about different algorithmic transparency instruments, and we will assess them. With that, please remember that this webinar is being recorded. We plan to upload the webinar later in YouTube as well. So if you are not happy to be online, please, you can always leave, or you can just simply turn off your camera. We will have the option of subtitles. So if you want to use subtitles, you can turn that on as well. After the panel, we will have a Q&A. So I would like to invite you to consider questions. You know that in Zoom we have a Q&A section. So please start bringing your questions whenever you find them interesting to bring to the floor. But we will have a space right of the panel for that Q&A. And with that, I would like to greet my co-lead, Alison Gilwald. Alison, hello, how are you? You're muted.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, Alison, thank you very much. Alison is the co-lead of this project. And of course, I would love her to introduce herself as well, because I haven't mentioned that she leads Research ICT Africa organization, but I know that it's worthwhile to know more about your position and your organization.
Thank you so much, Juan. I'm the Executive Director of Research ICT Africa, which is a digital policy, regulatory and governance think tank. We work across the continent with partners in numerous countries, but also with continental and regional and national institutions. We've recently worked with the African Union for the African Union Data Policy Framework, which is now being rolled out across the continent. And I've also been involved with the GPAI Data Governance Working Group, previously working and co-leading the project on data justice, which intersects very nicely with the work we'll be discussing today. Thank you.
Excellent. So we actually have some slides that I will turn on right now, and then I will ask Alison to please introduce GPAI and the project to the audience. We already have 37 participants, so it's growing.
Thanks very much. I think we can go straight on to the next slide. I think Juan's already spoken about the origins of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. This particular project is an interesting joint project between two working groups, one on responsible AI and the other on data governance. And they intersect very nicely around this issue of transparency and algorithmic transparency. Basically, the project is co-led by myself and Juan David Gutierrez. The project advisory group has been growing all the time as the project has grown legs and interest. But we've had already fabulous input from Avik Sakar, Presmetlo Bishek, Sedina Ndai, Abdul Majid, Juliana Sakai, Seong-On Huang, Thierry Warin, Daphna Pienhos, Rosanna Fani, and Irakli Kodeli, and the last three from UNESCO. And as I said, lots of other input and comments on the paper, which Juan and Sarah are going to present shortly. Also very ably supported, which we must thank them for. I know from CEIMIA and Antoine, and of course, Gwen has been helping us today. The Algorithmic Transparency in the Public Sector project is relatively new. It started this year. The objectives of this project are to study algorithmic transparency in the public sector with an emphasis on assessing transparency instruments, both reactive and proactive, that may allow governments to comply with algorithmic transparency principles, standards, and rules. I will speak a little bit later about the importance of this, that this is not just an end in itself for transparency, but how this fits very importantly into public interest governance. The project, which is, as I mentioned, already underway, but we'll be studying further through the case studies that will be spoken about today as well, the strengths and weaknesses of transparency instruments, the challenges of building them and instrumentalizing transparency in algorithms, their diverse usage and users, costs, how instruments can complement each other, and the potential contribution to transparency and other goals, such as, or underpinnings, such as explainability and accountability. And the ultimate goal of this is to produce specific recommendations for governments working towards algorithmic transparency. And I think as we proceed during the day, you'll see the importance of the initial work that's been done in this area, but the enormous need for expansion in this area. So the algorithmic timeline for the Algorithmic Transparency Project is that the first intermediate report is produced by the second quarter, which is right now, 2024. And the report basically overviews algorithmic transparency in the public sector, an emphasis on transparency instruments and public algorithms. And we will discuss also the importance of public algorithms in this context of greater transparency needed in both public and private repositories and algorithms, but that this being a kind of role model and key. The second deliverable is the intermediate report at the end of quarter 3. So that's also pretty soon now, where we will get the case studies, the 3 case studies that are being spoken about, that will be spoken about. And then by quarter 4, by the time we go to the summit, we'll have the final project report, which will bring together the learnings from these 3 countries, and hopefully suggest a way forward to take this work forward in the next phase. But we'll have to get to Q4 to get that information. I think there's one more slide after that, if you could. Okay, so we are now going to move on to the presentation of the State of Art report. It was done by Juan and Sarah, and I hope you've had a chance to look at it. It was sent with the invitation for the webinar, and yeah, very nice way to launch this project. So Juan, over to you and Sarah.
Thank you very much, Alison. I would like to add that the list of the board members, as Alison mentioned, has been growing. So the list that you saw before is the same list that appears precisely here in one of the first pages of the intermediate report, the preliminary report about the algorithmic transparency instruments. But it's also worthwhile mentioning that after we published the report, which it was finished in May this year, we've had a couple of additions, and I would like to especially mention Jorge Luis Ordelin, who is a scholar from Mexico and has been working on his own algorithmic transparency repository in Mexico together with Cesar Renteria, and he started to attend the advisory board meetings after this report was published. So I would like to add that we wrote this report, I mean, myself and Sara Muñoz Cadena, who will appear briefly. She is also a research assistant at Universidad de los Andes and at Policentrico, but she will also introduce herself in a second. And we had the fortune of receiving feedback from members of GPAI, starting by the co-chairs of the working group. So I would like to give all our thanks to the co-chairs who are Shamik, Francesca, Bertrand, and Amir, who sent us very early on their feedback, actually not just to the report, but in general for the project. And we also received very pertinent ideas, suggestions from the members of the advisory group. But as you can see in the table of contents, this report starts very broadly with the concept of algorithmic transparency, because we know that there are different definitions and there are different scopes for the understanding of what algorithmic transparency is. We situate the algorithmic transparency between among the public interest regulation, and then we move towards trying to describe different types of algorithmic transparency instruments that are being adopted nowadays or that have been proposed worldwide. And actually, it's this webinar will be very interesting because at least one of our panelists today will propose an absolutely new form of implementing algorithmic transparency in the public sector. And one of the most important contributions of this report is actually to map the existing repositories or registries of public algorithms around the world. And as my colleague Sarah and I will tell you in brief, there are around 70 active repositories in different countries. Most of them are located in Europe and in the Americas, but we will tell you a bit more about that. And of course, that has some policy implications. And we offer a thorough description of what we found in these repositories of public algorithms. As you can see in the report, it's clear that there has been a rapid adoption of different types of tools by governments around the world. But it's actually only a few governments that have decided to proactively publish information or provide access to information about their automated decision-making systems through repositories. And in some case, as you will learn later in more detail, it's not just governments, but it's also universities or civil society organizations that have published these repositories. So this is just, I just walk you through the report, which our colleague Arnaud will post in the webinar chat so that everyone can see. But if you receive the invitation to this webinar, you probably also have the link. We still have 5 minutes where we will walk you through with more detail into this report. But before that, Alison, I think that there's one bit that was touched upon at the beginning of the report, but maybe it's worth reminding people of why algorithmic transparency it's important, because we don't want to take that for granted. We actually want people to remember why this is important. So I'd like to invite you to give us a bit of your own insights about why algorithm transparency in the public sector and beyond the public sector is important.
Thanks so much, Juan. I think it is useful just to locate it in the broader sort of public interest governance framing, because I think very often in the context of algorithmic governance, it's referenced quite narrowly to refer to accessibility and explainability, with the kind of assumption that once you've got transparency, the job is done. And so I think it's important to understand it in the broader context of public interest governance, and particularly democratic governance, which equates to certain rights, and the transparency and accountability to the right to know within democracies, often associated with the right to access to information. And of course, because we are dealing with data, and one of the other critical countervailing rights in some ways are privacy, it's important to understand how these rights might work together, and where the right to privacy might be overtaken by a public interest right to know certain information. So often, or more recently, I should say, a lot of the governance focus on transparency has also been around countering corruption, countering secrecy in the state. So it's very much associated with the sovereign interests of course of a country in terms of protecting their citizens and being accountable to their citizens, but also the sovereign right to our data, the autonomy that we have over our data. And as we've got an increasingly datafied and digitalized economy and society, to know how our data is being used. So previously in a sort of analog world, there were very limited opportunities in engaging with government, or even more publicly, where we had to provide our private information, our civil ID. And we kind of knew quite well where that was being used. But with the automation of decision-making across government, and of course outside of government even extensively, even more so, it's been very difficult to even know where one's data is being used, or how it's being used, then being able to know where to ask in order to get that. So I think this is a obligation to apply these transparency principles is a very critical one, as we try and instrumentalize, and I use that in a positive sense, some of the discourse we've got around democratic governance of the data sphere, and of the accountability of the governments of agencies that are using this data. I just did want to say that, and this is particularly looking at the public sector, because as I said, I think it's quite difficult to instrumentalize and operationalize some of the principles of governance, mainly because a lot of this data is in a kind of black box at the moment. And I think trying to understand what is happening there and making people accountable for what is in the black box and what comes out of the black box is an important part of developing this whole new area of governance. So although this is obviously critically important to algorithmic governance more broadly, and I think the concept of transparency is often used quite fluidly in this regard, in the regard that we're using it for accountability of government. It's precisely for that. It's about making government accountable for their use of our information. But of course, as we increasingly get a lot of digital public goods privately provisioned, a lot of the accountability is actually in an area that is unregulated, operated by big tech across jurisdictions where accountability is quite difficult to enforce or to set up. So I think this is an important. I think this has been seen as an important instrument for us to develop within GPAI for member states, whereby states can become role models of what of what instruments can be used to ensure greater transparency, and so make these public algorithms have greater utility for people. They're obviously only as useful as they can be made for people to use them, whether that's citizens, whether that's researchers, whether that's other parts of government. And so refining those and making them more functional and having greater utility is an important part of this project and the examination of the use cases that we will be looking at today.
And please let me add, Alison, that while this project this year focuses on public sector, we are planning to expand this in future years. So please stay tuned for that. Okay, the report unpacks the concept of algorithmic transparency because we understand that algorithmic transparency can be understood as a capacity, as a principle, as a standard. It can be enshrined in a rule, both as a right, as an obligation. So we try to unpack this concept. We have some examples of each of these facets of the algorithmic transparency concept. But more important than that is that we try to distinguish different types of algorithmic transparency instruments that help in practice, in this case, public sector bodies, but it can perfectly help also private bodies or companies in particular. We've adapted the taxonomies that have already been proposed in the past by academia and by NGOs that work in transparency. And we divided the types of instruments into supply-driven instruments and demand-driven instruments. There are other synonyms for that. If you follow the literature on algorithmic transparency, you'll see the terms active or proactive transparency that is related to when the organization on its own, not because anyone asked, but on its own agrees to publish or to make accessible information on a permanent or at least periodic basis. And then demand-driven instruments, or passive or reactive, these are synonyms used by the literature, refers to situations in which somebody, particularly someone who wants information, uses a legal pathway to request information. You can see that we have divided into paths. So very fastly, let me explain the 5 subtypes of algorithmic transparency instruments that we characterize. So with regard to the supply-driven, which, as I said, means when organizations decide on their own to publish or provide access permanently or periodically to this information about their automated decision-making systems, we have online repositories or registers, which are, put simply, databases that are published in some online format by the organizations. Sometimes they're just a spreadsheet. Sometimes they're a very nice platform, which actually in Chile's case, María Paz Hermosilla will tell us more about that, because they have a very nice platform for the repository of algorithms used by the Chilean government. And these repositories are growing in number in the last 5 years. It's been a transparency instrument that has increased attention from governments, and that's why we wanted to focus our report on mapping these types of repositories or registries around the world. And in a few seconds, I'll pass the word to my colleague, Sara Munoz, who will tell you our findings. But we also mapped other types of supply-driven or proactive transparency instruments. Some of them are used in other scenarios. So one we termed user-driven proactive publication. This is when, for example, a public body publishes frequently asked questions and answers, so that instead of replying each time they get a question about something, they permanently publish certain information. And this has been used by public bodies. We were discussing before this event that we don't have evidence whether this actually reduces the amount of questions posed by people, because sometimes information can be part of Q&A and frequently asked questions and answers, but still people ask for the same question. But this is a way, of course, this is some way of proactively informing people. And the third way is automated responses that are triggered by the interaction of users with certain processes. So let's imagine, for example, when you, in another scenario, let's imagine that you want to purchase something online, and that before purchasing whatever you want to purchase online, a pop-up will appear whereby information about some system is being used, and not just to inform you about the system, but also about the implications of the system. Let's say that you're paying a public utility, or let's say that you are requesting certain service, and that there is an automated decision system that it's somehow informing the process or supporting the process. Then a pop-up comes out and informs the person who is interacting with the government, and in this particular case, in some sort of online interaction. So that's another example of another proactive or supply-driven instrument that is being used in other scenarios that we don't have information that it's actually being used now by governments to inform about automated decision-making systems, but it could perfectly be used. So as you can see, we tried to show that there may be at least hypothetical supply-driven instruments that could be used in the future. And then the other instruments, which are the demand-driven, are simpler. So requests of information that are based in freedom of information of public information laws around the world. So these freedom of information requests, of course, could include questions about automated decision-making systems. And actually, we are going to speak about that later on, because one of our panelists will provide a case in Spain where they try to use this institutional channel to obtain information. And I don't want to cause some spoilers, but it didn't go that well. And finally, we also have judge order responses, which is different because it's a different institutional channel whereby a judge, as part of a case that he or she has to decide, requests a public body to disclose information about an automated decision system that was used or that is being used. And we also have cases about that around the world. So this is a taxonomy where we try to increase the examples of different type of transparency instruments that are being used or that could be used to contribute to algorithmic transparency. And with that, let us close the presentation of this report with my colleague telling you about what we found about repositories around the world.
Thank you, Professor Juan David. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I'm Sara Munoz Cadena. I'm from Colombia and work with CEIMIA and Policentrico, researching about algorithmic transparency. Online repositories, as Professor Juan David mentioned before, of Registrar of Public Algorithms are one of the supply-driven algorithmic transparency instruments. In section 3 of the document, you will find information and statistics regarding the 79 repositories we managed to map worldwide. These repositories are in countries across the Americas, Europe, and Oceania. The United States has the highest number with 37 active repositories, followed by the Netherlands with 14, France with 4, and Colombia with 3. We have not found any repositories in African and Asian countries, possibly due to language barriers. However, after the document's publication, Violet Torrey, a software developer and researcher, contacted us about an additional repository in India, bringing total to 80 repositories. So if you come across any other public algorithmic repositories not included in the list after reading the report, we would like to hear from you. In the next slide, we can observe that not all repositories are active. 87% are active, 9% are under development, and 4% are unavailable. This serves as a reminder that there are costs associated with implementing these repositories, as well as costs related to website maintenance and information updates. The map repositories were created by supranational, national, and local public entities, as well as universities, civil society organizations, and private entities. As we can see in the next slide, these repositories can vary in format, the number of registered systems, and the number of variables. In Annex B of the document, you will find the complete list of repositories, the web links, the number of variables they contain, the number of registered systems, and a classification of the formats in which they are available. In fact, public algorithmic repositories are designed and published in various formats, from single documents with tables to Excel or CSV files and interactive platforms, as Juan David told you before, the example of Chile, or for example, the New York City repository that even allows data visualizations. In Annex C, on the understanding that algorithmic transparency, as mentioned before, is not a binary variable of 0 and 1, but rather has degrees of transparency, you will find a table in which different types of information displayed in the repositories for each of these registered algorithms. Here we present the 10 most common variables found in the repositories. The document in general reflects and mentions some trends in information disclosure by country. For example, repositories in the Netherlands tend to publish information on the justification for adopting the system, whether the systems use personal data, risk management practice, and human oversight mechanism. We hope this document represents a significant step in understanding and promoting algorithmic transparency in the public sector. So we invite you to read it and look forward to your comments, or even if you know about other repositories, we are happy to listen about you. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So we're done with the report. And as Sarah said, we hope to hear from you in the future if you have more information about other repositories that we have not mapped, or other types of instruments used for algorithmic transparency that we haven't identified. As a matter of fact, we will hear one of them later on. But we have to move on because we have very interesting case studies that will be presented by our colleagues. And I will start with Maria Paz Hermosilla. Maria Paz, I understand that you have some slides, so if you want to start sharing, please go ahead. And
yes, hi, thanks Juan David, and thanks to GPAI and CEIMIA for this invitation. Let me see, are you here? Are you seeing my slides?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay,
Thank you
great.
very much.
Well, I'm going to present the case of a Chilean public algorithms repository that we've been running since late 2021. I'm the director of GovLab at Adolfo Ibáñez University in Chile. GovLab is a public innovation lab based in the School of Government of this university, which is a private nonprofit university. And we are a lab that promotes the responsible use of data science and AI in government. So this repository, this is a screenshot of what you'll see if you go in there. And the goal of this repository is to track how government is using automated decision-making systems. So it's very important to say that our scope is algorithms, not AI. So there are systems, about half of the systems are AI, and the other half are rules-based algorithms that are used to make decisions. And the scope is also automated and semi-automated decision-making systems. And we have a search, you can search through several criteria. But basically, the repository has three things. One is cases, which we have 101 cases. We started with 50, moved on to 75 the next year. And now last year in December, we uploaded more cases to reach 101 from all types of policymaking areas, except we haven't found in defense and in culture, but in all the rest of normal expense areas that are classified by the IMF, we do have algorithms. So you can find cases with their information. And we also have an annual report where we analyze the landscape, the state of the art of the global, of the whole amount of cases. And you can also download this data in an open form in CSV or in Excel. So basically, the repository offers these three functionalities, depending on which kind of user you are. So what is our motivation? One is to show, we always get asked, what can I use my data for, by public agencies that want to use their data. And so this is a good place where we can visibilize how government can use data and encourage them to innovate. Also, it's really important to understand what's happening with algorithmic transparency, which I'll tell you more about later. And also for us, it's a really good tool for teaching and for research. So our users are basically, up to now, the users we've run into are public servants who want to, innovate in their areas, and they want to see what's happening, for example, in health. I work in a hospital. So, they can filter by health and look at algorithms. We also have researchers that are doing, for example, audits on discrimination on cases based on our repository, or who have used our database as a counterfactual for other research that they're doing. We also have teachers who use this repository to teach things, anything from data science classes to digital rights classes. So it really can be used in different ways depending on what you teach. And journalists. So also, when any scandal or anything happens around automated decision-making systems, usually journalists will go to our repository and use our cases as a way to explain how this is happening across government. Our methodology is that we find out about these systems basically by public announcements made by government agencies or by the media. In a variety of different kinds of reports. It could be in social media, it could be in the press, it could be in a speech or a conference. And once we learn of these algorithms, we track publicly available information. We do not do FOIA requests because of the cost of those. We have tried this in 2019 and decided it was too costly to have as a sustainable methodology. Then we review initial criteria and present to an editorial committee composed of researchers and professors from our university and other universities, including Juan David, who I thank for taking an hour every month to help us in this editorial committee. And basically what we find, we need to check if there is a decision, if part of it has been automated or fully automated, if it's been implemented as a pilot, and if there's at least one source where somebody from the government owns the algorithm. So if nobody in that agency has said that the algorithm exists, we cannot publish it. And then, well, after the editorial committee approves an algorithm, then we create the whole, we call the ficha, which would be like a card with basic information that is available publicly, and then we publish it. Majority of algorithms, there's no code. So that's really important to say. There is not enough transparency in public algorithms in Chile to be able to actually share code. When there is, we do, but it's very few cases. Challenges has been the quality of the information. It's very heterogeneous. Sometimes we have a press release and some information on a website. Sometimes we'll have a research paper, which gives us more information. Sometimes we'll have a bid, an RFP, from public procurement, which also will give us more information. But since we don't do FOIA requests, freedom of access to information requests, we have to rely on publicly available information, reports sent to Congress, annual reports, etc. Still, there is information, at least to get a minimum level of, to know these algorithms exist and to understand their purpose and who built them many times. But in terms of financing of the algorithms themselves, we only know about what their funding comes in half of the cases. In terms of sustainability and financing of our repository, that's also been a challenge. Currently, it's part of our just annual budget of the lab. So we have to sustain it with profits from, the training we do or other research projects. Last year, we won a research project, which is helping us pay for the IT costs of this repository, but definitely funding this is a challenge. We're, a university, but it's also part of our mission and vision to do this work of watching the government in how they're implementing these systems. Last year, when we were trying to understand, so that we have one of our fields, one of our variables is if the algorithm is in use, or if it's been discontinued. And actually understanding this from publicly available information is really challenging. So we've had to refine our methodology because especially back office algorithms, once you announce that they exist, usually you don't talk about them anymore, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. So how do we define if a system is in use or not is not an easy thing. The taxonomy has also been a challenge since we were one of the first ones that started doing this work in 2020 actually was when we started this project and we were defining the taxonomy. It's been a challenge to say, to basically define what do we describe about these algorithms that we can describe but by publicly available information. And visibility. We always are trying to think of new ways to raise awareness about this. So this year in the second semester, we're going to do a campaign on share an algorithm. So we're going to try to get people to share algorithms with us. What are the contributions we see? Well, we're the only source in the country that is permanently and periodically characterizing the use of these systems. So this sustained mapping effort gives visibility and has been in addition to the discussion for legislation for AI policy. It's the place where policymakers can see what's happening in terms of AI. And Chile has just approved a new AI policy. We're discussing an AI law. So we do have a lot of things to say about how the field is progressing. And it's also been a starting point for other research. So we do have colleagues who have won grants and are doing audits. And the results are yet to be published. On Friday, actually, the first research team from Universidad Austral and Universidad Central will talk about one of the audits they've been doing. So it's really exciting to see how our work has been inspiring others as well. And to close, well, basically, if we want transparency, algorithmic transparency, to reach its real goal, which is, accountability, is for people to be able to evaluate algorithms and see if these algorithms are respecting their human rights. Repositories are not enough. We will need other things. And what we have been doing is we want a grant to create open source tools in Spanish to help governments implement principles, ethical principles, responsible AI principles. And we're currently testing these tools. So we have one transparency tool that's published. It's variation of the model card that many of you may know. We also have a bias assessment tool that we're testing. And in the second semester this year, around October, we're going to publish an algorithm impact assessment in Spanish. So we do believe that government, if they just, open up what they're doing, they're probably not going to be doing it well. There's not going to be a lot of information, so that we do need to give them help and tools on how to do this better. So that's, I think, something that's complementary and needed than to have more responsible AI and automated decision making. And to finish, we are doing some research commissioned by GPAI within the project that Juan David and Allison explained. So we are currently doing the research for the 2 reports that Allison was mentioning, the second intermediate report and the final report that will be presented in the summit. And this research has 2 research questions. One is, how are public algorithms repositories built and operated, and if these instruments contribute to algorithmic transparency, and what kind of value is created. So we are researching 3 case studies in depth with interviews with both the builders and the users of these repositories. And we will write a report with the lessons learned, comparing the 3 case studies, what we learned from them, also with the lessons from the state of the art report that Juan David mentioned, and with recommendations for government. So we look forward to sharing this research with you around the end of this year, and thanks to GPAI for this invitation.
Maria Paz, thank you very much. By the way, Gwen just shared with everyone the link of the Algorithmic Transparency Report in the webinar chat. And we have already started receiving questions via the Q&A box. Please carry on doing that. We will open the responses, live responses, after all the panelists have spoken, but you can start writing your questions right away. Okay, so let us carry on. And Mariel, could you please turn on your camera?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for the invitation.
Welcome.
You hear me well?
Welcome. You're.
Do you hear me well? Because I'm on the mobile phone.
We can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm the head of ETALAB, and ETALAB is a French public department which aims since 13 years now to promote open data and the use of data by administrations, guiding and helping them technically and legally and financially. And one of the aims of the French state digital roadmap of last year is developing and using data to improve public services. And ETALAB is responsible for the increase of public action transparency, leveraging data to fulfill the constitutional mandate for the administration to report on its activities, and is responsible also to enhance public services using data to enrich and guide public services more effectively, such as with proactive measures, and boost the economy and public innovation, making data more accessible to stimulate economic growth and innovation, particularly relevant with the rise of machine learning, AI, that requires very vast amounts of data for trainings. And this includes the use of AIs, which are increasingly used in French public services. For example, in university admissions, calculating tax, helping teachers to design their courses and exams. And since many years, ETALAB took up the subject of algorithm transparency. We published guidebooks on the matters. I will give you the links by mail because I cannot do it now, but I will give you all the links by mail after. And ETALAB also promotes the development of open source AI to work towards a more transparent public action. And here, algorithm transparency is viewed as a governance instrument. And to help us, we also have a network of correspondence, points of contact in all administration on data, algorithm topics since 2021. And we work daily with them. And about the legal obligations, the French Constitutional Authority decided that algorithm based on machine learning cannot be used as the sole basis of a procedure. It requires the rules of the GDPR that requires a human intervention in administrative decision. And it's quite far away because a law was already adopted in 1978. This law created a commission for the access of administrative documents. It's called CEIMIA. And these commissions allow citizens to request administrative documents, and those requests include source code of public algorithms. And it can be the algorithm used for the calculating income tax or assigning students to high school, for example. But they can use this tool, which is quite an old tool now, to ask any public algorithm. And there was another legal framework. It's a law of 2016. It's called the Law for Digital Republic. And Italab largely contributed to this law. And when public administration uses algorithm for providing public services, some information must be provided. First of all, they must mention that an algorithm is used for the procedure. And since a few months, we even have the communication department of French state who asked also that every time that AI is used for a photo or a text published on a website of information, it must mention also the use of AI. So it's a reminder, but it was already in this law. But regularly, administration make reminders to be transparent with the public. And when those algorithms are used, an individual detailed and intelligible explanation of how algorithm is used must be done also. And more precisely, citizens must be informed of how and how much the algorithm weighs in the final decision, which data are used, where does they come from, parameters taken into account. It's very detailed, the operation realized with the algorithm. And they can also ask for more information on their personal case on this CADA that I've talked before. And we, in ETALab, we are here to help the administration to comply with all those regulations. And we regularly have many questions from them. And we help them also with our internal lawyers. And what about the instruments for algorithm transparency that we've deployed? We've made the first depository of public algorithm in France on GitHub, and on it, public can find the most important public algorithm, such as the one to calculate income tax and child benefits and a lot of other projects. But following this path, we also work on an open source software published, and we've published a list of more than 18,000 where it's collaborative. So we do it with other administration, but we've got a website where there is more than 18,000 public algorithms and code and informations highlighting the most used and those that are still updated from day to day. We also have an experiment. We work with also other public services to develop Catala. It's an open and easily readable programming language, and it's a code language to make it more easily to understand the algorithm. So it exists since a few years, but I think it's a good project and a good example. I will give you also the web link where you will find all the detailed information about Catala. And for the future, we will apply the AI Act, which imposes reinforced obligations, like for everyone, for AI developers, who will be obligated to give administrations using their AI precise information concerning their work. And algorithm transparency in the French public sector is historically linked to the use of open source software. So we have a team also working with us in our administration on, in general, open source, and we work on open algorithms, codes, and explanation with them. So we see it broader than only the algorithm. It's really all the topics of opening data and transparency. And we believe that transparency can be improved by documenting how public algorithms work and affect life of citizens. And explainability is the key. So we still defend the law for a digital republic of 2016. We are working on improvement of transparency. And we also, when about our own project, we publish also on GitHub all the documentation in real time, and we update it as much as possible. We were working to educate and to inform and to help all the administrations about the subject. And we try to do our best on our own projects and to answer to all the questions that are asked regularly to our department.
Excellent, Marielle. Thank you very much for the presentation about EthaLab. Now we have two cases. One from Maria Paz that is a university. GovLab is a university in Chile, and now we have the contrast of EthaLab, which is a public endeavor in the French government. And after these two cases, we're going to discuss yet another type of organization who has first-hand experience with this algorithmic transparency challenges. And let me introduce you to David Cabo, who, as I said before, is the co-director of CEIMIA, an NGO in Spain. David, welcome on board. Tell us about your own case, please.
Yeah, so hi everyone, and thanks for the invitation. So I'm gonna share my screen because I have a few slides, and I think, yeah, I think, can you see it fine?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, so basically, CEIMIA, we are a nonprofit working in Spain for 12 years on trying to make Spanish public administrations more transparent and more accountable. So normally we look at things like public procurement, lobby, things, appointments of public officials, things like that. We were not specialized in algorithmic transparency, and actually we were not even looking for these topics when we stepped into one particular case, which is on electricity subsidies to vulnerable communities and low-income people, basically. So basically, what we were doing was monitoring the efficiency of a new program that was helping people pay their electricity bill, and this is before the pandemic. This is 2018. And what happened was that we noticed that there was a very low non-take-up. Basically, a lot of people that were supposed to be beneficiaries were not applying for it because we started explaining that the process was very complex, the form was very hard, blah, blah, blah. So basically, part of what we do is not just denounce that something was not working. So actually we thought, what can we do? So we decided to do an online assistant that would help people fill the forms and apply for this benefit and so on. So basically, we work together with the market regulator because this was the body's overview in the system and overview in the subsidy in particular. So together we built this online assistant, and we got hundreds of thousands of people who use the tool online and generated the forms, and we helped them go to the right place to submit the forms and so on. The thing is, the law specifying the subsidy was not too complex, but still there were a few edge cases and scenarios that were not totally clear for us. And we were talking to the lawyers from the market regulator, and they didn't know either. They were like, oh, actually, I don't know if this is the right, we are reading it right. So we thought, okay, this is interesting. And And especially when we started getting calls from people saying, oh, actually, you told me I should get the subsidy, I applied, I didn't get it. We thought, okay, wait, maybe we actually screwed up. Maybe we are doing something wrong. How is the government doing this? Are we reading the law in the same way as the government is reading it? Because, and here it helps to know the bit of the process. I'm not gonna go into details, but basically, just so you know, the process was a bit unusual in the sense that you didn't apply for the subsidy to the government. Instead, you apply to your electricity company. But because this is based on your income, the electricity company doesn't know if you actually are allowed to have the subsidy. So what the company has to ask the government. So basically what the government did was create this algorithm, but this automated system called Bosco, that has access to all the public databases, your income, and all these things. And basically, Bosco receives an application. It checks whether you have the right or not to the subsidy, and then it replies to the electricity company saying yes or no, basically. So the consumers interface with the electricity company, but the electricity company interfaces with the government. And I will mention later that this is actually very important because this is helpful, because this basically made Bosco like a separate system. And I will explain later that this is unusual and it was actually very helpful. So we thought, okay, so how does Bosco work, right? Are we reading the law in the same way? So basically, what we do as investigative journalists, we do a lot of, we do hundreds of access to information requests every year, basically. And as was mentioned earlier, this is actually very expensive and it takes forever, but it's basically the tool we know how to use. So we ask for technical specifications, the test cases, and the source code, right? And I have to say now also, like, Bosco is not artificial intelligence as defined now, because it's not, it doesn't do machine learning or anything like that. It's a rule-based system. But we thought also like this was good to, it was a good way to start, basically, because it was a good way for us to start testing whether access to information laws and mechanisms actually work when you start asking about a piece of software, right? So, well, the spoiler is no, it doesn't work, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. But yeah, so basically we asked for all this, and unsurprisingly, the government said no. You're not getting anything because software, all this stuff is not covered by the transparency law. We appealed. There is this independent transparency council that belongs to the administration, but is separate from the ministries. And they said, yes, you, after a few months, I mean, this already took like probably 6 to 9 months. After 6 to 9 months, we got some documentation. We got the design docs we asked for. So we had some idea about the architecture. We had some idea about the logic flow, and everything seems to be okay. Some basic specification for a software system. Okay, so this was good. And we also got the test cases. Basically, they had the list of things to test, like, okay, what if I have 10,000 euros? Do I get the benefit or not? What if I have 3 children and I don't know, and I have no income, right? So they had this list of things to test, and most of them were right. But we actually showed that there were 2 mistakes, 2 edge cases where basically, I'm not going to go into the details, not to bore you, but basically you can get the subsidy if you are low income, but also if you have a certain type of pensions, but also if your family is very big. So there are different things that overlap, right? So there are some edge cases where it's like, actually you don't get it because of this, but you can get it that way. So we proved that Bosco was making mistakes. It was saying no in cases where it knew that the person actually should get the benefit just for formal reasons. So we told the ministry, and they said that they were going to fix it. And later they said, no, actually, it's done. We fixed it. So fine. Okay. So that's kind of the good news. It's like they said they would fix it. The bad news is that we cannot check. And the problem is also that we didn't get the source code. The Transparency Council said yes to the first part, but not to the source code. I'll explain the reasons now, but basically for us it's important in this case, which is not machine learning, where we would ask for different things like training data or things like that. In this case, which is a deterministic system, we're asking for the source code because we already proved that there had been mistakes made when transforming the law, which is written in human language, into a technical specification. In that process, you can introduce mistakes. So we wanted to check whether there were mistakes also in the later phase where you transform the specification into an actual piece of code, right? And also because in this case, the system is not that complex, but we see this as the first system in a long list of automated decision-making systems that are being introduced more and more, right? So this started in 2018, so it was a good time to actually start testing like what's going to happen when the more complex things come. So basically, the Transparency Council said no. The council said no because of intellectual property, which for us doesn't make any sense because the system was developed internally by the government, but also, and these were the reasons given by the government when we were appealing, they said national security. Basically, they said that if they gave us the code, we could hack into all the databases of the system, and that we could mine crypto coins in the ministry's infrastructure, which doesn't make any sense if you have any idea about technical stuff, but that's what they said. And also, but later on, they basically said, well, okay, it doesn't matter if it's wrong, because anyway, if you detect that there is a mistake, you can always appeal the decision. So this is not so important, okay? So these were the decisions given at different stages of the process. Because we didn't agree with the Transparency Council and we took them to court, to them and the ministry. Our kind of the philosophy underlying this, and there is actually a big debate in the legal circles in Spain about this, is that we consider these systems that take automated decisions, that we should treat them as laws, because basically they're implementing the law and they have effects on, they have important consequences on the rights of people, the right to receive a subsidy, for example. So this is in kind of in line with the AI Act. Like we think these are high risk systems, basically. Okay, we were making these arguments. The AI Act didn't exist. But now we would say that all these systems are high risk systems, and we expect transparency from them. The bad news is that so far we are losing. Because the first instance court and second instance, which is the Spanish National Court, they both agree with the government saying that this is too risky and that the code has intellectual property. So we are not allowed to see it. As I said, we don't agree with this. The technical arguments are stupid. The intellectual reasons are also, to us, they don't make any sense. But basically, we are now at the point where we asked the Supreme Court to look at this case. We think which is not automatic. We think the Supreme Court will say yes, because this is very new and it's the first case in Spain about this. But this is so far taking 5 to 6 years already of questions, appeals, litigation. So far we don't know what's going to happen. And just to close, I mean, this was the first system we found, and we were not even looking for it. But once we got into this, we said, okay, so what other systems like this there are? And basically the answer is we don't know. I mean, sometimes the politicians talk publicly about certain systems, so we know about those. But when we ask for details, they say no. It's very hard to get information. And actually, we were very lucky with Bosco, because what we are seeing now is that very often these algorithms are implemented as part of big legacy systems in mainframes or whatever, so they are not documented independently. So when we ask the social security system for how they do certain things, they say, no, this is not documented. We have no documents to give you because this is part of the overall system that we've been running for 30 years. So it's very hard to get information about these new algorithms. And also when we try to use procurement data to find out about these new things, again, normally it's very hard, at least in Spain, because what happens is that the government hires a consultancy for like 10,000 work hours, and then they work on whatever the ministry tells them. So yes, this is just to complain a bit. As external independent journalists, it's very, very hard to know what's going on inside public administrations. So we are in favor of registries, because hopefully at least they will help us get started and know what we have to investigate. So hopefully they'll move forward with that. And that's it. Thanks a lot.
David, thank you for your presentation. And of course, this shows that algorithmic transparency is a challenge, and using the instruments that are in the law to make actually feasible to obtain information is also difficult, even for organizations such as CEIMIA that dedicate themselves just to transparency. This is what CEIMIA does. CEIMIA, of course, goes beyond AI, but they are experts in their field of public sector transparency and look all of what has happened with this case. And well, of course, we hope that the final decision will bring more light to what will happen in the future in Spain. And of course, there's more questions related to what will happen with the AI Act now when it is completely in force. And we'll see that. But unfortunately, Robert Boss, who was one of the colleagues earlier, was present and he was part of the presentations. He had some problems with his connection. So we hope that he'll come back and maybe he'll be able to tell us about the Netherlands case. But we can move forward. And now I would invite Maria Paz, David, and Mariel to take questions among you. Because I know that there's several curiosities that each of you want to fulfill. And I think Maria Paz has a first question for Mariel. So Maria Paz, if you would like to provide the time to Mariel, are you there? I'm just making sure that she hears. Yes. Hello, Mariel. Okay, Maria Paz.
Yeah, Mariel, I was just wondering, since your law, the law of the Digital Republic is from 2016, do you have any evaluations on how the implementation has been on the parts regarding algorithmic transparency?
More generally, we have, you hear me, yeah? More generally, we have a public evaluation about open data and have a high-value data set also. So we follow more precisely open data, and there are roadmaps on what administration want to do. So it's not homogeneous. Some are following up very precisely, and others are following up more lightly. So we at the moment, since last year, we follow more what they are going to do starting from this year, and we don't do especially a focus on transparency of algorithms, but more on transparency in general of data, of codes and everything. So I send by mail some links so you can have a look. And that's right that some administrations have are very compliant with the transparency, with the code and with the explanations, and others we can see that they need to be helped. So we try to focus and to help and to remind them what they have to do and to help them. But we don't have a special pack on a special focus on especially on this topic. It's really in general about all data and algorithm and everything.
Thank you, Mariel. Do you have more questions, Maria Paz? Would you like to?
Yeah, the second one is, have you seen more resistance from oversight agencies? Like, for example, tax agency, or environmental agency. These are agencies that use algorithms to see if any regulated subjects are complying, with a certain regulation. We've seen in Chile, we've seen a lot of resistance from them when we talk about algorithmic transparency. They're like, we cannot be transparent because the algorithms will be gamed and will fail. And we've been advocating for like a certain level, a minimum level of transparency that is not complete. But I'm just interested to see what's the discussion with oversight agencies and algorithmic transparency in France.
We have more questions about the public on those topics. And sometimes it's the public who pushes the questions and the transparency, saying, hey, you have to be transparent. We have questions and everything. So on those type of agencies, that's right, that the public is pushing. So they open more quickly and more widely. But but it's not especially a resistance on algorithm. It's just a resistance on opening any kind of data, like open data codes and everything, and also of transferring their data from one administration to another. I will answer you the same thing as your previous question. The subject is more about sharing data, or sharing data inside the administration, or sharing data outside to the public, whether it's algorithm, whether it's data themselves. It's the same subject, and it's general. It's rare that administration are opening easily. It's a change of mentality, so it's a day-to-day work, which requires a lot of energy.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mariel. Just in the webinar chat, you'll find a link that Gwenel just shared with everyone, asking attendants if you are interested in this project, if you want to get involved somehow, or just have an interest in getting more information. There's a Google form so you could register yourself. Okay, David and Mariel, do you have questions that you'd like to pose to Maria Paz or each other?
No, not so much. No.
Yeah. Mariel?
No, it's okay. Thank you. It was very clear.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Then let's move on to the last section of this webinar, where Alison will moderate the questions from the public. There's already 4 questions that are out there, but if you have more questions, please do so. And Alison, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juan. So I think this first question from Juliana is actually coming up in different responses, actually. But the question is, I think it was specifically during the time that you were speaking, Maria Paz, is any of the identified public repositories a legal transparency obligation, i.e. that government agencies are obliged to provide active transparency through the repository? And I think some of the other questions actually relate to that. So Stefan's question, how can we encourage meaningful transparency, such as an explanation accessible to the lay public, and discourage transparency, the tick box? Many of these are, how can we make these mandatory, so that the default is that public governments have to provide this information. And so, Maria Paz, it would also be interesting to speak in the case of Colombia, rather than you're spending a lot of time trying to find references or sources for these, whether there's been any attempt to get the Colombian government, for example, to default, make available every time an algorithm is used for automated decision-making into this public repository, which is obviously a far less intensive way than what Mariel is describing, responding to requests, on every instance. Maria Paz.
Okay. Yes. So I understand that. Well, in Chile, it's not. I think Juan David is the best person to answer which of the public repositories are legal mandates. In Chile, they're not. I think that encouraging meaningful transparency, for example, has to do with science agencies funding researchers or nonprofits to do the work of algorithm auditing, because once you have good algorithm audits that expose government to kind of embarrassing moments in the press and everything, then governments want to, do things well because of the reputation risks. So I do think that we do need, for example, science funding has a role in funding research that will allow, or philanthropy, but if we want to say what government can do, science funded could be kind of like a contribution to watchdog people who do the research that keeps government on their toes. So I think that there is a big, there's a role there for agencies like the science agencies. And in terms of getting regulation passed, we have been working with the Council for Transparency since 2021 And we did a first initial report with them where we surveyed 870 agencies in collaboration with them. A third of them answered. And we published an initial report which showed that 80% of the algorithms didn't have any public information available. That agency in 2021, in December, announced that they were going to start considering mandatory algorithmic transparency regulation. In 2022, they did a pilot. We did workshops with 25 different regulated agencies. They wrote a draft regulation. Then we did a pilot with 4 agencies, 7 different systems. They published the information that the regulation would, in theory, mandate them to publish. And then we had a change in the board of this agency. So this is an agency with 4 counselors, and 2 of them finished their mandates. And since 2023, the government didn't nominate new counselors. So it was kind of like the board didn't have quorum to meet and do their normal work. So of course, nobody did anything in algorithmic transparency. And then with the new counselors, we still haven't heard if they want to prioritize this new regulation. So from the civil society, we also have a role to push government, to make these things mandatory. We can push parliaments. Now we have an AI law in discussion in Chile, which, if approved, will mandate high-risk systems, like in the AI Act in the European Union, to publish more information about how they do their decision making. So, but that law is going to take, I don't know, 3 to 4 or maybe 5, or who knows if it'll ever pass. But we do have a data protection law in Chile, which is being discussed tomorrow, the last session. And if that data protection law passes, it does have mandated algorithmic transparency for decisions that significantly impact the lives of peoples with personal data. So we might end up having some mandated algorithmic transparency in Chile thanks to the data protection law. And it is a little bit better than what you have in the European Union, because we did manage to get the language improved in our law. So I think that there's many factors in place to have like meaningful transparency, but we're just starting, to be honest. So if you're if you're part of this activist community, because that's why I guess you'd be here, there's a lot of work to be done, to be honest. I don't think anybody has it like right and ready already.
Thanks, Maria Paz. I think that's absolutely correct. And I think, it's one of these areas where, developing countries, middle income countries and advanced countries are often struggling with the same things. Although I think there do seem to be different instruments. So, I think using open government, countries that have committed to open government, if you can try and get sort of contemporary updates to that identify algorithmic as in a way that requires mandatory algorithmic transparency, there might be these mechanisms. For example, the case that we were given of Spain, where there is actually legislation, but it's kind of not, it can't be used in an updated way that would allow you to challenge traditional notions of national security and these kinds of things that are often used to prevent transparency. And so one might need these kind of updates. But I think I threw you out, Maria Paz, by saying Colombia instead of Chile. So thanks very much for the examples from Chile. But Juan David, perhaps you could also just, Maria Paz was saying you've got a sense of what developments there are in terms of mandatory transparency.
Sure. Thank you very much, Alison, and also Maria Paz for pointing out this. And thank you, Juliana Sakai, for the question. In the report, we actually identify some mandatory sets of rules relating to not just algorithmic transparency, but in particular to register or repositories. And we found that there were mandatory rules in the US, in France, and we also found that many AI bills that are being currently discussed include algorithmic transparency provisions, and that includes some sort of national registry. So in Latin America, for example, there's at least 10 AI bills being discussed in congresses, in parliaments, and most of these bills will include some sort of national AI registry. So the existence of repositories currently, the 70 active repositories that we found are currently not driven by legal obligations or not explicit legal obligations, but we did, as I said before, found a few cases, including France, the US, where evidently there are specific rules about it. And with that, maybe Alison, you can mention that there's a fifth question that just arrived in the Q&A box.
Yeah, and we've also got one from Stefan Yanis that also takes a slightly different angle. But and I suppose it goes to the question of public and private algorithmic transparency. But it says, is there any evidence that the push for greater algorithmic transparency might discourage some private actors from entering into tendering agreements with the public sector bodies? And, is that a problem? Or actually, if they're not going to be transparent, maybe this is a good issue in public procurement. But maybe David, are you wanting to take that question, or do you have any knowledge, or perhaps Marielle, you have some?
Yeah, personally, I don't have any evidence about this. But yeah, as you said, and as the question says at the end, I don't think it is a problem. I think the procurement with the public sector has a certain requirements, like you need to be open about how you do certain things. So, I mean, of course, there can be there are always like exceptions, national security, and there are some sectors that are less transparent. But no, I don't have any evidence of this.
I can say something regarding this question. So when we did our research in 2021, we researched 12 different systems in depth, and we tried to answer the questions of the Ada Lovelace framework for these 12 systems. And in some cases, we were able to answer the questions with private sector information. So basically, the company who provided the service to the government would have enough information available for us to get like a minimum level of transparency in terms of understanding the logic of a system, the purpose, the general information of a system. So where this could, if the government will procure like design-made systems, like systems that are built with government data, reading the patterns of government administrative data, government can set the rules. So they can say there's no problem there, with a private provider, because the algorithms are being built custom-made for government on the data of government. So in that case, the level of transparency is determined by government. The only place where there could be problems is in algorithms protected by intellectual property, such as, like a cancer detecting algorithm. That imagine we have a company, like it's the same problem as drug-related pharma companies. So if you develop the best algorithm to detect breast cancer, you don't want that to be transparent because it's your business advantage. In that case, the requirement when procuring should be that the algorithm is certified, or audited by a third party, a trusted third party, has been through testing, etc. So in those cases, I understand that they can't be fully transparent, but that doesn't mean they can't be accountable through other measures. So because we also want public hospitals to use like the best technology available, even if that best technology is protected by IP. But if it's protected by IP, it should be accountable in other ways. So basically, government algorithms, I think, should either be open or auditable. And this is also the view of somebody in the American Development Bank, Arturo Muente. He always says that open or auditable, and I agree. So the ones that can't be open should be auditable by a trusted third party with non-disclosure agreements, all the works. But it's very hard to think that a government algorithm is like completely secret. Nobody's ever checked it, seen it. That would be really not acceptable, I think.
Marielle, were you wanting to respond to the other question? Because I think Maria Paz's response has kind of gone to this next question we have. But why don't you, if you wanted to speak about whether transparency requirements might limit private players from tendering for public work?
I think as long as it's clear, we have done 4 different pilots with the government agencies and the government procurement agency, where we've put transparency requests in the bids, in bids for algorithms built, custom-made algorithms that the government wants to build. And honestly, there's been applicants for one. If we do a good awareness of these bids, we do have applicants. So one of them had, the last two ones, one of them had 15 people, 15 different agencies applied, the other one 6 different agencies. That's not agencies, sorry, companies. So basically, we have tested this. Okay, let's put out a bid that requires higher transparency by a public sector or private sector provider to government, and they compete. So I do think that the challenge there is to kind of standardize the requirements so then, if every public agency asks for different things in transparency, then as a private company, you're like, oh, it's too cumbersome. But it's the same kind of problem in general public procurement. But if you know the rules and it's in the bid, we have in our pilots shown that private sector wants to apply, then they get the bids, and then, well, it's different how it's being implemented. For some it's been easier than others, but I don't necessarily think it's discouraging. It depends on the conditions that the government puts.
Thanks, Maria Paz. Marielle, did you want to add to that?
The only way that, the easiest way to make them have a public transparency in their algorithm is to include this in the requirements when they can get public funds. So when we work with agencies giving public funds, we try to make sure that in the requirements it's written in black letters that if to get the public funds, they have to be transparent with their data as much as of course, respecting personal data, but with both public data and algorithm. And same thing with when we use we publish public markets to choose a provider of anything. We also try to promote this idea of making it a requirement in the public market to other administration. So they try to choose, and it's a criteria to choose the good provider too. That the best practices, and not only in the digital field, in all kind of digital. It can be just providing food or anything. Transparency of data, both data and algorithm. We don't separate this. Can be added and can be promoted and rated in their result, in the result of the public.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of going back to what David was saying. It is public money, and if it is somewhat onerous, that's the requirement. And of course, taking into account Maria Paz's question of, if we can create some certainty, predictability, uniformity across government, that's obviously the case. But I think also, Maria, you're saying it accounts to all data, but I think, with algorithms and automated decision making, there is particular lack of transparency, explainability without these kind of requirements up front. But I just wanted to that sort of Maria Paz's response about public and private responses to this kind of addressed Lejla Fetik's question, but I wondered if someone else would like to comment on it as well. And it's particularly this issue that we were raising right at the beginning. There's a lot of discourse on transparency and accountability and explainability with algorithms, and it's if you tick all those boxes, and it's all very clear. But in fact, there are a lot of tensions between some of these things, and sometimes claims of mandatory transparency can prevent other forms of accountability because you've already taken care up front with a transparency requirement that might, for example, not require or permit a audit requirement at a subsequent point or something like that. So Lejla's question is, in the light of the difficult relationship between transparency and accountability, Sometimes transparency is a requirement for accountability. Sometimes transparency serves as an excuse for lack of accountability. Have you seen negative side effects of the existing registers on accountability or the goal of responsible use of tech in the public sector? Marielle, would you like to respond to that?
Sometimes transparency is not full; it's just a part, and some departments can say it's to protect or private data. They just find some reasons which have nothing to do with the subject, but they don't. That's right, that there is a resistance to open, and the resistance also to open the full, the complete algorithm. Sometimes they just give a part of it and part of explanation. So it's not just a daily work to promote transparency, but also to promote full transparency. And there's also the transparency for the professionals, the developers who can understand easily what's written on GitHubs and technical platforms. But it's also a question of transparency for the public, and use the simple words, right words, so that everybody can understand easily. And this is another topic. And now this is a topic about a simplification of the way administration explains and writes communicate with the public. And this is an even more complicated, an even more tough subject to explain simply, easily what is done with algorithm. Use simple words, and we are doing a great work, a huge work on the simplification of communication. And this is a subpart. A simple explanation of algorithm is a subpart of, in general, just explain more easily what administration is doing and what you can ask, what are your rights and everything. And this is a few departments are working on this topic. And we have some specialists of language, of UX design and everything to make it easily accessible and easily understandable also.
Juan, before I know you wanted to wrap up, I would also be interested in your input on that, just from the mapping exercise. And, we speak about public repositories and the, accountability to citizens, but in fact, the difficulty of creating these in ways that they are, that they are accessible and have utility for citizens. And then particularly, perhaps just to link that to David's case, where, I think this is a very interesting case of the media playing that fourth estate role that's kind of been so muddied in our data world. So these algorithmic repositories are not only usable for audits or for researchers, but are actually usable by media, by journalists, by citizens, to make government accountable.
Indeed. Well, I think that we've heard different experiences today that show that algorithmic transparency requires effort, requires a sustained effort, not a just one-shot effort. It costs. It actually requires some preconditions. Maybe if not a legal piece that mandates transparency, at least the willingness of public bodies to disclose the information and their understanding that it's important under a democracy and a rule of law for citizens to know whether there are or not automated decision-making systems that support government decisions and that may have implications for citizens. And in that, we've heard about different public processes that are important for making these algorithmic transparency instruments useful for citizens. We've mentioned, our panelists have mentioned, for example, public procurement rules. If public procurement rules do not make sure that public bodies are actually able to disclose part of the information and to even allow for future audits, then it's going to be impossible, not just for citizens, but even for governments to make the developers of these systems accountable. The mapping of the repositories showed that, as you'll see in the report, that there are many different formats for presenting the information, but I would say that most of the formats currently are very basic spreadsheets, which may be very useful for researchers and even for journalists, but I don't think that they're very accessible for citizens. I think that a next step for those both governments and other organizations that have created these repositories is to think how they can make them more accessible for everyday citizens. This is something that, and again, Maria Paz has shown her repository. This is a case for the repository in Chile, where the platform is quite citizen-friendly. As a matter of fact, we've found other examples in that way, not just at the national level, but also at the subnational level. For example, the New York City repository is quite friendly and even allows for some data visualization that it's very easy to create, even if you're not an expert. So, as I said in the beginning of my closing argument, algorithmic transparency required efforts and sustained efforts and requires putting citizens in the center. If we want citizens and other civil society organizations to make use of these repositories in particular for all the means and objectives that we've mentioned today. Algorithmic transparency, of course, it's about human rights. It's linked with human rights, but as Alison mentioned at the beginning, it's also associated with a proper use of public resources. One of the findings from the repositories, and with this I will finish, is that sometimes even governments are not aware of the systems that they're using. Maybe a certain ministry has adopted a system, but the other ministries are not aware, and they're not aware of who developed the system or which ministry acquired a system from what company. And having this information in one place would perhaps allow governments to take even better decisions about how they use their resources to acquire the systems and to deploy the systems. So I think that we will continue talking about transparency because, as someone in the Q&A chat session said, transparency is a stepping stone, is an enabler of accountability and many other important principles for responsible AI development. And it's just a first step and not the last step. So we have to keep on working on this and seeing it not just as an isolated effort, but as part of a broader effort of bringing good governance to AI. And with that, perhaps, Alison, I'll give you back the floor so that you can close formally the event.
Not at all. I think we've more or less run out of time. I'm going to use your closing remarks just to thank the various panelists for their really, really insightful things. I think, as I said, we've got so many entry points now to where we might, provide recommendations, extending existing open government frameworks, extending existing access to information agencies, so updating those, having the various kind of repositories. I think it's very positive that we're seeing the potential, inclusion in Chile in the Data Protection Act. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that there could be algorithmic decisions around non-personal data that have very dramatic impacts on the public. So I think, and that is probably unlikely to be captured by the Act. So, decisions might be made around, climate change or something that would impact on people's, second and third generation rights that would probably not be covered by that. So we need to find ways of of making this mandatory, certainly providing incentives and working alongside government to make these independently public repositories independently available. But such interesting insights, the case of Spain and the incredible work that's been done in representing people's very basic social protection and subsidy rights that they've been unable to exercise because of these algorithmic interventions or potentially having been done wrong. And then the very interesting case of France, which we will be looking to try and increase a citizen participation in accountability and in getting information about how their data is used. And thanks very much, of course, to Sarah and Juan for the presentation on the report. We really are using that as a stepping stone now for these cases and for hopefully mapping further repositories that maybe we didn't capture in Africa or Asia, though we've done a relatively good scan, and we're hoping that these will be regions that once we've produced recommendations and showcased some of the working repositories would be interested as governments to take up this project and implement. But that will be further down the line. We'll still have to persuade various people that this is worth doing. And I think already the inputs we've had have shown that there's a lot of interest and potential there. So thanks very much to you all for your participation, and thanks very much to the organizers for putting this all together. Thanks for your time and your input.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.